Date for them to vote on. And again, we want to make sure, let's be clear, that you get this information that is updated and accurate for you to make the decision that you need to make for this region, in a local region. And now I'm going to turn over to Judge Covington for a few other.
Hey, I appreciate everybody being here. This is better, I think. We don't want to do that. But this is a great opportunity to share information. It's an informational opportunity, and really want to welcome our guests. We have several elected officials here with us tonight. I want to ask them if they would go ahead and introduce themselves to the group. And then we also have several folks that have been part of this process, consultants that's been here, and we want to welcome them as well. And then, of course, I want to make a special thank you to Secretary Jeff Noel. Introduce him in just a minute, and he's going to speak about KPDI and then regional applications across the state. And we appreciate his time to be here tonight just to share. So if we'll lead off with Madison County Judge Executive Reagan Taylor.
Hello everyone, my name is Reagan Taylor. I am the Madison County Judge Executive. Really glad to be here with y'all tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, Robert Blythe, Mayor of the City of Richmond, taking a break from the KLC meeting over in Lexington.
Good evening, everyone. Bruce Fraley, Mayor of the City of Berea. I'm happy to be here and excited to hear what you all have to say as well.
Fantastic. And then, Kevin, would you like to?
I'm Kevin Atkins. I'm Mayor Gordon's Chief Development Officer in Lexington.
Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate the time that we get to spend the night together and talk about the prospects of this regional business park. And we've talked about it quite a bit. And the next step is the consideration by these bodies of this interlocal agreement. And in a future opportunity at a court meeting or a council meeting, those bodies will have the opportunity to consider that information, and through this process at that time there'll be opportunity for public comment at that meeting when that occurs. So and that's an important part of the process. So as we move forward, I do want to recognize Secretary Noel. Secretary Noel was appointed Secretary of the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development in June of 2022. He is responsible for the development and administration of executive policies designed to support and promote the attraction of new jobs and investment to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and maintenance of existing industries and overall support of economic growth for the state. Secretary Noel previously served as Whirlpool's Corporate Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs, reporting to the Chairman and CEO, a position he held since 2004. He also served as President of Whirlpool Foundation, which includes oversight of the company's 20-year relationship with Habitat for Humanity that has touched over 200,000 families. Secretary Noel also shared that he grew up in Franklin County, right down on Wood Lake, and we all know where Wood Lake is here in Stanley Ground, Scott County, and had a lot of family on Fisher's Mill, so he knows our region, and we're very glad to have you, and welcome.
Thank you. Would you like me to speak now?
I would like you to. Glad to have you.
First of all, I'm not real sure what I'm going to say. I actually just was invited to come, and I will always come to any meeting. We'll talk about economic development, talk about projects, and I'm assuming that's what you would like me to focus on. Do I need to use the microphone? First of all, just for a matter of clarification, I'm not good with technology. Is this on? Right. Just clarification, I got family all around Wood Lake. I actually grew up right on the corner of Peaks Mill. Didn't have to know that. And absolutely, I mean, I know this area. Spent a good part of my young life and adult life in the tobacco business, including owning some tobacco warehouses in Lexington before I wound up in Michigan. But that's really not why I'm here. I've got one real bias that I want to get out on the table, and then I'll get through things, and I'll tell you right up front what's not about. What does motivate me, and what motivated me when I went to work for Whirlpool Corporation Two things. The most important one was I spent 18 years, 4 days, and 3 hours cogitating on how to get home to Kentucky. And when I told my boss I was ready to retire, which I was 62 at the time, he says, "You got to give me 3 more years, basically." So that's what I did. But I really have always felt that I'm from Kentucky. But a bias I have, and I did learn it in Michigan, I think to the point that I now better understand it. So bear with me just 1 second. I was offered a job in Michigan, and what drove me, and actually I think it's what you all have on your plates today, is your responsibility. You know, I was asked to go to work in a community that on one side of the river that at one time had been the manufacturing haven where all the wealthy lived, in a community called Benton Harbor. And across the river is where all the so-called, what they call factory workers used to live. I don't know why that's a phrase, but that was the history. Things changed. Benton Harbor became impoverished. When I was asked to go there, it was basically 97% African American. High unemployment. It was voted as 300 out of 300 places to live by Money Magazine, so it was ranked the worst place in America with some of the worst schools that were across the river, and not a very wide one. It was where a lot of the folks lived. They were highly fluent, typically white. And my job was to try to bring the communities together. And what I learned, whether you agree or disagree, but my passion is that there is no better way to help a family find that independence and find that optimism about what their future can be and what their future can be for their children than to first be able to have safe shelter, that when the head of the household or jointly they find good stable employment that they're proud of, that shelter becomes a home. And through that good job, they actually help them allow their kids to dream better and do better. And I only bring that up because on one community that had ignored having a vision for the future and things that needed to be done, they fell into challenges. The other community had great, big, bold, ambitious plans, and they came together as a community, and I think they thrived. But one of the elements that was common for both as we were working to try to redevelop one community and help the other help the one next door was that it was meetings like this and very open conversations and an ability to even agree to disagree that really made the community stronger. And so I would say that I agreed to come here tonight, not to come in and try to pitch I'm for anything or against anything, because I'm not. My job is to simply work on creating the tools, creating the programs, and then communities decide for themselves which tools they want to use, how they want to use them. And then Jenna and I, others that work on economic development, we deal with just the natural forces that comes from businesses making decisions and making decisions where to locate. But again, I want you to understand that almost in everything I do, I lean on the side of what does it take to help attract and bring in jobs, because I really do believe it is the only way that families can have the kind of independence and pride and self-respect and belief in the future. Now, there's things that we can do to help that, but those jobs really do drive it. So that's my bias. I will also tell you that I'm very adamant that we just don't try to attract jobs to create a number. In fact, I left economic development, went to the corporate side again for the second time, because I felt like it was too much chasing. Let's just put a job column up here, and we don't care what kind of jobs, we don't care what kind of employers. I don't believe in that. At our cabinet, we have a goal, and it's basically a threshold of what we try to attract in terms of wages for those jobs. And it's basically a minimum of $27.50 an hour that has to be the minimum pay plus full benefits. And I say that because sometimes there are areas and things you do that perhaps don't meet that. But if you don't have a standard in terms of economic development, and you don't really believe in trying to create the kinds of jobs that bring in and do things, then I don't think that you're really doing your job. The second thing I really believe strongly in is in the quality of the company and the quality of the leadership. And that's something that we look at when we meet with companies, and there's a couple of people in here who have been around me enough to know that there's been times that companies don't have the kind of shared values that we Kentuckians have. They don't have a vision for how they want to treat their employees, and we step away from those projects because I just believe we should have the right ones in. But everyone is in here, I think, to hear probably 3 or 4 key elements of the KPDI program and what you all are looking at. So first, let me go back to, I'm not here to push one over the other. I read in one of the publications that the cabinet's pushing or encouraging regional projects. We bring them up and try to bring out what we think are some of the benefits of regionalism and the regional projects that go into play. But we're not encouraging or insisting upon. We simply share the facts. And here's a couple of facts that go into this. And that is, there is no more competitive profession or activity than economic development. And understanding data is sometimes really very important. So since I've been with the cabinet, not because of me, but just the data since I have been there, we have had probably 300 leads that we have shared with companies, companies that are looking where to locate. And where they come in and ask for acreage, believe it or not, the average acreage of the recommendations that we have made is about 348 acres. I say that because since my time of doing economic development decades ago to where I am now, the size of projects necessary have grown. The amount of acreage that companies are looking for has expanded, and quite candidly, even the size of buildings has expanded. The average request we have of existing property can be 220,000 square feet. So I say all that because back to this issue of regional collaboration, regional efforts. When we did our blueprint and we went out to the state, started talking to economic developers, community folks, workforce folks, and others, a common theme did come up. And that was that there's some communities that simply want to partner with an adjacent community or a surrounding community because they believe that their real benefit comes from having a great industrial or technology site in their what's called a commuting pattern for their residents. And they're just as happy to have residents living in their neighborhood or living in their community and driving somewhere else to go to work. We heard this a lot across Kentucky, and that is we want to see the kind of sites that can attract real jobs and great paying jobs. If that means it needs to be in an adjacent community, we're fine with that because we will get our benefits from it. I'm not saying that's right or wrong for everybody in this room. I'm simply saying that is a belief. Another thing that we see with companies is that they know and they don't look, quite candidly, at any kind of geographical boundary. I mean, companies today come in and they want to understand the area in which they're going to be, where their workforce is going to come from. And in Kentucky, it's typically can be, people in Kentucky like to drive, and I do too, but it can be 45 minutes. And Kim, I think it can be an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending upon the company. And if they have great culture, their folks are willing to drive. So companies come in and they want to know that labor shed area they can draw from. And they want to know that they can get that size site they're looking for. And they want to know where they can have community colleges and schools in the region for which they're going to draw the workforce. And so, quite candidly, for the elected officials up here, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but they don't come in and want to understand exactly the philosophies of the mayor or the city council or the judge. And they kind of get a sense of it. What they really want to know is, where can I find my workforce? Where can I have the kind of quality of life that my people deserve? Where are the services that we can rely upon? And oh yeah, where's the site? And where's the best site that we can have? And oh, by the way, let me just share with you something else that's changed. Where can we get a site that typically we might be able to start construction 60 days or sooner after we make a decision, or sooner after we make a decision? So that's one of the reasons why this idea has come up about regional type projects where communities have worked together because of the change that's out there in terms of how jobs are being created. And let me also come back to a lot of those jobs that we mentioned here are those big anchor jobs, big anchor employment. It's another thing that the companies and communities we've been with talked about. Some communities actually want to have those really bigger sites so you get that big major anchor that can come in. But what happens is in those surrounding areas, the supply chain, suppliers come in, and maybe they don't need as large of a building. So nonetheless, even if you have a regional strategy for a regional park to attract some of those major anchor users, you still better have your surrounding communities, if they want them, available with smaller sites and smaller opportunities, because those suppliers will come in and they will follow the leads of some of those big anchor companies. So it's all about strategy. The other element why we talked at the cabinet about some of the benefits of communities coming together is just that. The size of sites have changed. The cost to develop and acquire a site has gone up. And under the KPDI program that some of you have heard about, which was an appropriation by the legislature the previous biennium of $100 million, which, by the way, we have given out all of those funds in a competitive process. So that told me, in fact, I know, because I hear from them regularly, many communities who applied didn't get funded. So we asked for an additional $100 million. We were given 70 over 2 fiscal years of 35 each. And candidly, I can count noses pretty good. We're going to be oversubscribed again because communities really understand that if you want to be in the game for economic development, you have to have land, you have to have it under control, and you've actually got to have everything that's needed ready to be able to move on a short period of time. But here are the issues. Previous application, the first round of the $100 million, there was a form that the legislature gave us, and every community could not request more than what was in that formula. In some cases, it was $500,000, some cases $750,000. And that meant that when you start talking about how many acres can we acquire, what kind of infrastructure can we put in, it didn't really offer up for larger sites. The second phase actually allowed for $2 million per county. And our next round will be the same. Having been in the real estate development business a little bit, I can also tell you $2 million is a whole lot of money. But $2 million doesn't go a long way when you're trying to acquire land, put in the infrastructure, and do the things that you're going to do. And I have told communities, just my philosophy. If you're going to stretch all your money just to buy the dirt and not do the things you need to do to put in the infrastructure and do the things that you need to be done, please don't bother. Because in today's world, you need to have everything you need to be able to go forward and make that develop. So the reality is that we said to communities, if you're trying to get a bigger piece of ground, you know you're going to have some infrastructure issues, you know you're going to need to put things in, and we can work together over several years to get that infrastructure. You're able, just based on how the legislature set up the program, to be able to leverage those funds by working together. So that's the reason that we had indicated that we thought communities, if they were looking at those kinds of projects, should come together and collaborate and cooperate. One, companies really don't look at geographic boundaries. Two, in today's world, they're looking for larger sites, more acreage, more ability to move forward quickly. And they're also realizing that in today's world, they're going to draw a workforce in multiple counties around. So that's another reason why a little bit of what was called this regional collaboration, people working together, is a topic. But I will come back and simply say that it's not something that we're requiring, that we're insisting upon. It's really a local community decision. And therein lies, I guess, where I'll come back to just a couple of other little tidbits that might help. And then I have a feeling I'm going to be asked a few questions before this is over with, and I'm happy to do that. First of all, regardless of whatever the decision is, the community debate, some of the emails I received, some of the calls I've gotten, no matter what the outcome, everybody should take a step back and realize that the communities are stronger as a result of the process. It's just my humble belief. And I have every belief that raising questions and identifying concerns and having communities coming together to address them is the best thing to be done in any kind of community and economic development. So I think that's number one. Number two, I certainly have been involved in a lot of projects that had some controversy, and even the folks who were on the other side, they're still some of my best friends and the people that I respect, and I believe that I have seen, at least what I've read, that this communities together and the people involved have been very respectful of each other, even though there may be disagreements over issues. And I think that's absolutely one of the greatest things that can happen, because when we disagree but yet still show respect and for one another, it's great. The third is I respect the elected officials for coming together and putting some sort of a plan, because I think in Richmond, if this project goes through, there will be people living there, and I believe there'll be suppliers that will go there. Same thing in Berea. Same thing, for everybody in this region. In fact, I think that's one of the benefits that can come from it. The other thing that I know, because Georgetown and Scott County, I was actually working for Wendell Ford the night that he came in after having dinner with Toyota, and Chairman Toyota, and he said, we got it. And of course, it was the Toyota project, because how long I've been around, don't say anything, Kim. I have been absolutely impressed with the leadership in Georgetown, Scott County, and the surrounding community since Toyota came in. And there's not very many back roads in Scott County that I haven't been on, either when I was raising tobacco or working for every farmer that could find me to go to work for them. What you ought to have done, it's the same thing in the other communities. Having a vision and knowing what kind of jobs you want and what kind of restrictions you're going to have and what kind of implementation of environmental standards and things of that nature, I think you all have done it extremely well. When I drive and see the new schools, I drive and see the new residential areas. My son was actually a resident of Scott County for a while. You should be proud. And that's one of the things that I really compliment those that have raised questions with concerns about this project, to make sure that attention to detail is not lost. Now, if you still disagree, I would say raising those issues are critically important, because I'm going to come back to a thesis that is absolutely true. When you've got communities that have raised the bar, have set the standard, put in place the guidelines that you have in terms of the kinds of jobs, the kinds of requirements for paying attention to the environment, the kinds of jobs that I would say, you also could say we want some design standards relative to entranceways and things of that nature. The companies that you want accept it and actually appreciate it. They don't run away from it. And I think this conversation you all have with the kind of jobs you want and the kind of restrictions you want to have on site is absolutely critical important. And trust me, when I was at Whirlpool, we liked to know, what do you expect? What do you expect from us to be a neighbor? And what are the things we need to do to be a good neighbor? And I believe that's very much part of the process that all of you have thought about. So I've gone on more than I need, but I'll just also give you just one more data point. All the leads that we have had have been predominantly, which is a bit unusual. And this could change, but at least you're living in a world where they have been new projects. It typically was always existing led more as opposed to the new. We also had pretty high level of international interest in all of the sites that we have had. But furthermore, it's the kinds of jobs and the kind of technology that goes with them. And as I like to say, most of the companies we have worked with, when you go see their existing facilities, you see most people wearing a white coat or whatever coat they have and carrying an iPad. There's lots of different jobs that are going on in manufacturing today. And I think that we have, and I have to give the governor credit, we are leading the way. So the top industries that we have had by leads have been, yes, EV related and automotive. You've also had things like consumer goods, food and beverage, and companies that actively are coming in to create renewables or do something that's really positive for the environment. Those are the kinds of companies that we are dealing with. And the average investment and jobs that we've had over the last 3 years, I'm going to give them to you because it points to why that 348 acres is the average. You know, it's ranged from a low over the last 3 years of investment of $150 million average to a high of $207 million average. Think about that. That's average, not the highs. And the average jobs of the projects that we've had coming in with our leads has been a low average of 177 jobs to a high average of 284 jobs. You can't get those kinds of projects if you don't have the vision, you don't have the ability to provide the product, and you don't have the wherewithal of people working together to show the strength, not just of what today is, but what the future holds. And now I'm going to take questions or be quiet, because I always like to use the quote that Ralph Roberts gave before we could see it. I was working on a project with him. Most of you don't care, but he turned me down the first time. It was a long time ago. I grabbed my 2-year-old son, and I drove 200 miles and found him in the office and waited in the lobby until he would talk to me. I discovered the quickest way to have a manufacturing leader talk to you is to bring a 2-year-old and put it inside the lobby area. Got him. I'll tell you what I did, won the project. But when we announced it, he made a comment. I never want to come to a community that says they're perfect. I never go to a community that says we are the best ever. I want to go to a community that will tell me the honest truth about disagreements, perhaps, issues that need to be addressed. But I want to go to a community that says, and here's our vision for addressing it and dealing with it. And he said, I also want to come to a community that has a plan in which even the voices of opposition are not only respected and still well liked, because communities are communities and companies need great people. And guess what great people need? Great people need great communities. This interdependence between being great and being winning is stronger today than ever before. So trust me, you won't have companies that are going to be knocking on your door that you don't want. And if they do, you can politely say, we have a vision and you don't meet it. Because I will tell you, today's companies know they have to have the culture and the commitment to not only attract but to develop their workforce. And they need to be active members of community and supporting that community because they know how that is important for them to attract and retain talent. And I really believe that putting together projects like KPDI is one of the most important elements of having that secret sauce to be able to attract jobs and attract companies that want to invest in your community, invest in your people. And it is all about process. And I'm anxious to listen. Most of you would like me to be quiet. And I'm actually happy to answer questions. But I don't know if that's what you really wanted, but I wanted just to bring you in a few little tidbits about my role and my philosophy, but most important about data and what we're doing with KPDI. Any questions from first the officials, and then I'll go. It's not my meeting, I don't even know what I'm saying. Sorry, Mayor.
Are there any questions?
I've got a question possibly. You may not know it off the top of your head, but out of those 177 to 284 jobs, do you remember what the average salary was or hourly wage on those jobs?
I don't, but I'll use a different number. I think in the last 2 years since I've been there, I'm going to be off by a few pennies. But the average wage has been around $26.54 per hour before benefits. Now, we have had some outliers that have probably skewed that a little bit, and I'm real candid. And one project that we worked on, really great company, it was a company that had a great strategy on attracting single-headed households and providing them the flexibility and the things they needed to take care of their families. And it's also a great career pathway for individuals. And we said, companies like that have a strategic fit. So it's not always just the average wage, but that was our average for all incentivized jobs before benefits. Other questions?
You said the average number of employees the average number of employees is what now?
So the average employees per inquiry that we have relative to, and I spoke in code and I really apologize. So we will get a call from a site consultant, we'll get a call from a company, or they'll send in this package, and to all the folks that get to respond, we appreciate it. Sometimes they give us 48 hours to fill out all the data. We usually get inquiries and they're looking for a specific size site, they're looking for things. And the average of those inquiries that we've had over the last, really since the last 2-3 years, has averaged a low of 150 million of investment and a low of 177 jobs. Now, we've had companies that have come in that created less and had less investment. This was the average of the request we had to submit proposals, and that ranged from 150 million to 207 million, and from 177 jobs to 260 jobs.
Jack,
Gives you a sense of the scale.
Okay, Jack, who's the largest employer in Lanes Run? The Commonwealth? Okay. Who's the smallest? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, you're not. No, probably 4 controls.
Okay. And they've got how many? Okay.
60 to 50 to 60.
Okay.
And look, that's an average of the inquiries we have. You get these kinds of projects, because typically you don't get the suppliers coming in always asking for these types of information. These are kind of big core projects that you get with those requests. Those are the kind of projects that then lead to the smaller enterprises in some cases, and that's what helps fill up places around and create. And I love them because the more of those you get, it's like a portfolio. And I believe strongly in getting great portfolios and diversified fields.
Secretary, would you speak to your experience, site consultants? If we don't have a payable product here in this region, we're not going to compete to get the potential investment from site consultant. Do you agree with that? And could you speak to that process through your experience?
Well, if you don't have a site that is close to meeting their requirements, and you don't have all the things that they put in that request for information that checks the box that you have it, or you don't have an ability to say we can get this done in a very, very short period of time, then these folks don't get paid to recommend communities and regions or areas that don't have the product mix that their client is looking for. So it's just a basic situation. It doesn't matter what any of us are shopping for. If you can't find it, you move on to where it is offered. And yes, it's a very competitive situation. Site consultants actively are finding ways of taking communities off their list as opposed to keeping them on the list. So it is important. But it's not the only thing. Look, communities can have their own strategy around job creation. It can be, let's keep the area small. Let's have a certain set of acreage available, and those will create those opportunities. But it's the kinds of projects that become anchors that help create a lot of the spin-off benefits and things that can happen that really, really, I think, can make a difference. And the only reason also that I feel like the KPDI program is so important, we do need the product, we do need the sites. Whether we agree or disagree, and I actually am agnostic whether it's EV, ICE, hydrogen, all I know is that we want as a state to win the automotive transformation. So whichever way that portfolio goes of what's powering those wheels and making them turn, we want to make sure we got that real source here so that we continue to have the kinds of jobs that we have in Kentucky. And so that's one of the reasons why with the change that's happening, and we know it requires bigger sites and bigger land, we wanted to have a KPDI program to help make sure that there's one part of that.
Sir,
Yes, ma'am.
talk a little bit about the KPDI application, strength of application. There's limited funds. Some people don't get the funds that they want, maybe not get any funds. What's that process of those who win and those who lose?
Well, I know practically everybody always wants more money, and so they don't even, when they get awarded, sometimes they say, well, sure, could have used another $500,000. So this is the process. And if I speak in economic development speak, stop me and I'll make it as clear as I can. We don't get into judging winners and losers at the cabinet. And we don't go in terms of trying to look at the land, because I know more than anybody, I've been burned too many times. When I look at a piece of ground and they say, that's the best piece of ground I've ever seen, it's till you really get all the analysis done that you can really understand. So we have an independent consultant that also is one of those site consultants that works for companies in recommending where they go with the site. So when we go in for the round, there's kind of what I call a desktop that we do at the cabinet and others, just to make sure that the blocking and tackling is done in terms of the information and material. Then the site consultant goes in, they do their desktop study. They look at, what's the water flow, what's the electrical demand loads that you've got. They look at everything from the topography. They look at where there could be critical wetlands. They look at all these issues like they would for a company prospect, and then they score it. Then they go out and actively, and this year we'll be doing January, but they actively go on the sites and do an evaluation, meet with the community, and it's as if you are being asked by a company to bring this information and talk about your community. So everything from the basic infrastructure, the load, the everything that you need, the natural gas, where's the workforce coming from? They ask questions relative to healthcare, you name it. They're scoring you in terms of the site itself, the physical characteristics, the cost to develop, all of the necessary infrastructure that a company would need to have. Then they're talking about how well you've got all the facets of community life and things that are needed, and they score the site, they score the community readiness, they score the workforce attributes that are there. They put in a little bit, not much, most of it's data driven, but they give an explanation of what they feel is the community got that can-do spirit. All of that is then scored across all these categories, and then every site is scored exactly the same way, and then we put those sites down in numerical order based upon scoring, and we start with the top and work our way down. Then the cabinet staff and the KPDI staff, we do go through each and every one of those applications, but the amazing thing is site consultants doing this work, using data, doing topo maps, you name it, they can actively come in and make a numerical numerical recommendation, and they are really spot on, because that's what they do for a living. So the scoring process itself dictates it, and what we try to do at the cabinet is, there's two things that happen. We score all the way down, so the best get the scoring. Then we score our way back up based upon communities that have had more challenges across our state than other communities, perhaps higher unemployment, higher poverty, you name it. And we try to see if there's any way in which they might have a way of improving their score. But it's basically final decision based upon this very aggressive but very thorough numeric scoring process to get the KPDI funding. All that said, let me also share one other thing, and that is, while I love the process, while I hope the legislature will keep funding it, I would love to have funding where we can do housing and some other things. But if we say to a community, you weren't chosen, then they have another meeting with the site consultant and they hear why. And we've had quite a few applications that have come in that were turned down the previous round that, man, they knocked it out of the park. But short answer, which is what I should have given, and I apologize, it is through a very rigorous process, and it's done by people that their living, their primary living is making these site recommendations to companies. We try to make it non-personal, non-political.
Yeah, and the average amount of money given, is there an average?
There really is, and I should have brought that data, but those we fund. We don't cut back on the funding requests. So in other words, for the communities that come in, what they're eligible to apply for, most of them apply for the full amount. We don't cut back on funding. We simply give that funding. So it really is a best scores get the money, and when we run out of money, there's no more money to be had. And let me explain why we don't cut back. There is nothing worse on the site. I'm just going to use a hypothesis that you may need a special pretreatment facility, or you may need to expand water capacity. As an example, it's going to cost you $500,000. If we were to cut that $500,000 out of your funding, well, now you don't have a critical piece to be successful. We are trying to fund these projects so success occurs, because success breeds success. And I'm working on projects, and there's been people in the room that have, when you get an anchor type company, it's amazing what you can do when some of the suppliers come in terms of looking at more rural areas or looking at other parts of the state. It just creates more activity. So the primary objective on the KPDIs, let's fund communities that have the attitude, willingness, and desire to be winners, and let's make sure they get the funding they ask for, because if they say they need it, and it's validated by the consultant, let's don't short shift this, because let's make sure you have the product ready to go, because that's called the Kentucky Product Development Initiative. Have a product so you can actually show it and get a project, which is somebody comes and says yes and invest money. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you, sir.
I'll try to be shorter, I apologize. Other questions and comments?
Secretary, I have a question for you. I'm trying to understand the relationship between the Economic Cabinet and Transportation Cabinet, and let me kind of play this out a little bit. I remember when Governor Bevin was in office, he had this quantitative scale, or at least somebody in transportation, that roads got repaved or widened based on if they were economic drivers. And I want to understand the relationship with the Economic Cabinet and the Transportation Cabinet for people who are awarded the KDPI business park or funding. Is there a guarantee? What's the relationship look like if you're on a 2-lane road and the road could potentially be widened in the future? And that's not data points you're going to currently have. It would be something that would be forecasting in the future. So can you explain how that relationship works?
I'm not going to try and attempt to talk about how roads are determined to be blacktop, asphalt, and sort of things like that. But what I will share is Secretary Gray is amazing to work with. There is no guarantee that you're going to get funding to the road plan as it is, per se. But they look at things like community vision, where's community priority, where's the likelihood that there's going to be an employer that's going to come in, and how active, because they actually understand whenever we get leads, they know what kind of volume of leads and things that we get. And so it's kind of common sense that in that 7-year road plan, those are the kind of factors that help them make determination where to go and how to go, put in the kind of infrastructure, because they want to make sure if the community's investing in that park, they want to help the community win. But I'm not going to get into saying, if you're living down here, you know, off of one road and you're wanting to get that road paved, and it's a state road, that somehow you're going to lose out because there's an industrial park somewhere else in the county. Not that, but it is common sense that the funding from the State Department of Transportation is going to follow where the community vision, where there's potential for jobs and increased traffic, because all that comes into play. And oh, by the way, back to your question, which is great. You know, you score well by having a good infrastructure system around the park that you're, or the land you're looking at, and or if there's already road funding committed. And you won't get the same points if you're on a 1.5 lane road way out in the middle of nowhere thinking if we get this park, we're going to get funding to build that new road. They take all that into consideration because they have to. And this is one of the reasons why I'm such a big proponent of the program, is I just believe data on real estate is critically important, and let's make sure we put our money in when we've got all the right elements to drive opportunity. Because I go back to my bias, which is true. I want every Kentuckian to have an opportunity for a job. You know, we've got 5 areas, and we have a blueprint plan, and it's not just manufacturing jobs. I want advanced manufacturing. I want business and professional service type jobs. I actually believe in certain communities, healthcare is an economic development, and we want to help support them. I really believe that we, as a state, need to win the automotive transformation. We need to lead what's happening in the manufacturing world because it's changing rapidly. More and more automation, but more and more value-added and rich jobs. We need to get our fair share of business and professional services, which are looking for sites in parks just as well. And I believe truthfully that logistics and ag tech and aerospace and others are the kinds of high-tech opportunities Kentucky deserves to win at, and we believe those are the areas that we should focus. And every community that invests in job-creating locations and opportunities, sometimes you surprise yourself because some other type of industry locates because they've heard a Toyota happens to be in your backyard, or there's folks working on R&D in certain kinds of industries. It is such an interdependent, interchangeable situation that that's one of the reasons we're doing the KPDI program. I start trying to be short with my answers. I'm sorry.
This can probably be a short answer. So how many projects now, what did you say the initial that the legislature gave, the initial amount, 200 million? Or
They gave $100 million. And then we went through the buying, and now give them $70 million for the next 2 years through the bill.
So that initial 100 million's already gone out. So how many communities are partnering now, I guess is the question.
How many regional projects?
Yes.
I know we had, I believe it was 15 regional applications, because we still have some that are in the due diligence phase after already being awarded. If they're going, you know, if they pass the due diligence, they will get the funding. But I think we've had probably in the vicinity of, I want to say 10 or 11 have gone to the next phase in terms of getting approvals. We've had a large number of regional projects. But again, I'm not saying that we don't give points because it's regional. We don't. We don't go here and say, this is where we want it. We just simply say the practical applications are, if you want to have a bigger site or do the development, you're going to get more money by partnering together to bring in, you know, like you all did. I think your all's application potentially was $4 million or something like that. So you get more money when you have opportunity, because the legislature capped, each county can only get up to $2 million.
Any other questions?
Are you accepting questions from the audience?
This is my meeting, and I acted like it was, and I apologize, but I do whatever they tell me.
Steve, this is an information meeting for the court and the fiscal court and the public, and there will be opportunity at future council meetings, future court meetings for public comment and questions.
So the answer is no.
Yes.
Can I ask one question about specifically the KPDI?
Dan, if I allow you, you allow everybody.
I wish I could read your mind, I would try to answer.
About every county can get a total of $2 million only. Like if we send our $2 million to Richmond.
Dan,
I'm sorry.
so my understanding is every county is eligible up to $2 million. And regional projects can pool their money together and collaboratively use those funds in an application, towards an application.
Correct. And we don't require each county to put in 2 million or equal amounts. That's the communities to come together and decide for themselves. That also doesn't mean that a community can't do 2 applications. They may take a portion of their 2 million and do a regional effort, and they may take what's left and do another project on their own. Well, guess what? They may come. We've had some of these where some people are putting some money, a little bit of a regional collaboration over here, and a little money for the regional collaboration over. It's really up to the community, but you only can go up to $2 million.
And Georgetown City Council, Scott Campus Report, partnered on a local application, and we moved through that, and you've also partnered on this regional application. So we did exactly what you're talking about. And we thought that was the best path for our community.
And that's your own business, sir, and I'm not here to answer that question one way or the other. But I'm just trying to explain, that's how the regional, that's a technical element, and that's how it works. Communities can kind of do what and how they see fit. Now, I'm not here to steal another program, but I am going to tell you one that I'm really excited about, and that is we actually also have monies available for communities to go after federal grants, and we provide 97% of the local match required, and that can be for any roads, schools, workforce training.
House Bill 9?
Yes, sir. And I'm only mentioning that because we have actually seen some communities that have gone after federal grant programs that are now linked into their KPDI strategy. I won't name which ones, but there have been some that have partnered with Habitat to do worker housing, which was a soft spot in my heart. We've got 2 that are actively putting in training facilities that will be connected to and servicing what's going to be their KPDI application. We had one this month that's actively putting in a water and sewer grant at the federal level and a pretreatment, I think, at the federal level that's supporting and then would support and feed into their pending KPDI application. So those are the kind of things that I think you all, I know you all have looked at a lot of those things. I'm just bringing that out that we're trying to find ways of combining programs and making them fit the community vision. And I know there's technical questions and other issues.
You've been more than generous with your time, and I greatly appreciate you being here. Everybody else does.
And again, we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, but in the information you've given is much needed. And that so both the city council and fiscal court and those out here can get accurate information on what we're trying to do here.
Mayor, again, I said it earlier, and I'm going to be redundant. There are folks that I know have concerns and questions. And I applaud you. I mean, I really do. I think asking those questions and submitting them, and keeping in front of the elected officials is what you should be doing. I also want to congratulate anybody who's an elected official. When I worked with a good senator, he told me there was nothing more difficult than being an elected official at the local level. And having worked in lots of different things, I can tell you that it is. But without great leadership, where would we be? And I don't think there's any more important type of leadership than local leadership. And I can tell you at the state cabinet for economic development level, I can put all the programs we want all day long. I think I'm a pretty good salesperson, but I couldn't sell anything if we didn't have great communities with great leaders and great economic developers and everyone working together. There is no greater team sport than economic development, and I wish it were not true, but the realities are, for every community that wants to be able to have product and be in the game, there's thousands and thousands of communities that have already put up the cash, done what's necessary because they are aggressive. And since the time I was doing this before, what else has changed is we're no longer competing against other communities in other states. We're competing against other countries, and it's more and more regular that we find projects that's the name of the game. So local leadership really does matter. Local concerned citizenry matters. And in the end, I have every confidence the right decisions for the right reasons will be done. And remember what I said, don't be bashful, don't be afraid that if you have an investment you're making and you want certain design standards or certain criteria for the kinds of jobs that you want, or certain kinds of thresholds for any kind of runoffs or environmental issues. And I know there's a couple of business people in here, I'm not going to put them on the spot, but that's the kind of stuff you want to hear. it's not going to scare companies off. So make sure your vision is articulated. And I have a great comment, I know you all, that a lot of the questions and concerns raised by several of you will be reflected in whatever it is that you do in terms of that final decision. So I just appreciate your all's role. Thank you all for letting me. I think I turned this off.
At this time, we're going to have a presentation of the interlocal agreement draft, and we're going to ask them to come up.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Once again, thank you, Secretary Hall, for being here. You always inspire us, and thank you for your leadership in Kentucky economic development. I appreciate the inspiration because I'm about to go through a contract. So I officially am the dry person on the agenda. I'm Ann Tyler Morgan with McBrayer Law Firm. You all may know us down the street in Lexington, and I'm here with my colleague Neil Morris, who is a proud Georgetown, Scott County resident and has worked very hard to help bring this together as well. But my job here is just to help you understand the mechanics of how something like this comes together. Secretary Hull talked about all the components that are required to bring projects to the region. And obviously, when anything like this happens, you've got to call in lawyers, and we all get together and work as a group to make it legal and make it structurally sound so that it can be something that lasts for years to come. So I'm going to start to walk through that a little bit, and feel free for anybody sitting here in front of me, ask questions as I go, because this is pretty wordy, so if I get to the end, you may forget what you have to ask. But don't be surprised if Neil has to pop up and help me, because two heads are better than one, and we've got, of course, Emily and Devin over here as well to help answer those too. So I'll get started. Make sure this works. Tyler, you may need your technical skills. Wonderful. So I'll start by saying some of this material you will have gone over with Emily and Devin in past sessions, so I want to acknowledge that, but just as a refresher and for context, I wanted to go through some of it again. So your partners were recognized at the beginning of the meeting. At the county level, you have Scott, Madison, and Lexington Fayette Urban County Government, which you will hear me say LFUCG. It's just a little lengthy to say the whole phrase there. We've got the city of Georgetown, the city of Berea, and the city of Richmond. So this really is an impressive group that's come together to hopefully advance all of your all's concerns and needs for the region going forward. So this is when we really get into the fun statutory language that I love so much. All of this work is governed primarily by the Local Industrial Development Authority Act. Now, all industrial development authorities are formed under this particular chapter or statute, and a regional authority is no different. So we're going to call it an industrial authority quite often because that's what the statute calls it, but we do consider this a business park, and of course we've talked a lot to the types of businesses that you all may want to attract to the region, and I want to be cognizant of that. If I say industrial authority at any point, please just know that's what the statute says, and occasionally I will revert to that legalese language that we're prone to using, but this is a business park authority, and the legislation is really intended to create groups that come together for the acquisition, retention, and development of land for commercial purposes, develop those sites, and then market them, promote both the development and folks coming in to see those sites going forward. This is also an area of law that's governed by the Special Purpose Governmental Entities chapter of law. So it's two things at once. It's a regional industrial or business park development authority governed by those set of statutes. And then it's also a special purpose governmental entity. And you may be very familiar with SPGEs. There are also things like water districts and utility districts that are set up. They're just something special for the purpose of providing government services. All right, so the functions of this authority are actually quite specific. This will be a board, a group that's appointed by the local governments that are involved in developing this authority to both acquire and develop land that's under option, to encourage and market the use of that land for economic development purposes, to cooperate with federal and state agencies and acquiring grant funds, making sure that they're following all of the requirements for those grant funds and requirements of economic development law in general, and just essentially take any steps necessary to establish a working business park that's compliant and successful. All right. They may receive funds from the local economic development authorities or the local governments that are involved in setting this up. They may borrow money, they may enter into debt if that is what is needed to make the park successful and do the due diligence on the site. They may collect revenues from the local bodies that are involved to make that come to fruition. They may acquire title to the property that will be developed, and that property will be exempt from taxation as long as it's held in this way, just like any other government property. The law is pretty specific as to how the membership of the authority is formed, so it has to be 6 to 8 members, and the local bodies that are involved in this actually put that authority board together. So that's what's being done here, and in the case of this regional authority, the local bodies involved have decided on 6 members, 2 from each county level, with the involvement of the cities that are also parties to the agreement. And so we also have a membership agreement for this proposed authority that sets forth what will happen, for example, in the instance of a vacancy, and which local authorities will come forward to fill those vacancies. So this is a separate board that is nimble enough to make a park successful, to actually go ahead and acquire the land and make decisions to make it work, do the due diligence on the site, but also is very heavily led by you all, by the local governments that are parties to the agreement. We want to make that distinction because you need both. You need the board that can meet as regularly as needed to make on-the-go decisions, but you also want to make sure that the local governments that have entered into this and are appropriating funds for this and applying for funds from the cabinet and other sources contain that group within their original vision and maintain control over what's happening.
Do you want questions now or later?
You certainly can. I'm not opposed to hearing them now.
With the 6 members, does that mean that the lawyers, like our representation, can sit in on these meetings? Or, I mean, are these meetings open for public? Are they under the sunshine laws?
They are subject to open meetings, so yeah, they absolutely can have public comment. And I would presume that there will be local representation there at those meetings, or some sort of legal representation when necessary. I don't know that every meeting will have a lawyer present. I can't speak to that, but certainly questions will be able to be answered and so forth.
With the staggered terms, 2, 3, 4, what determines what county gets to appoint to what year?
That's a decision made.
Is that a local decision?
It is. It's a decision made by the parties initially.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Okay. So just speaking about the documents that will go into structuring this authority, this is a nonprofit entity just like any other that you're familiar with. So it's going to have articles of incorporation that are filed with the Secretary of State, and they're pretty boilerplate, to be honest. Any nonprofit entity that's filed with the Secretary of State has something very similar showing the original officers. Those would be those board members that are appointed by the local governments. It's going to have a set of bylaws, which are the working documents that provide the rules for when they meet, how a meeting's called. There will be a chairperson, a secretary. You know, you all serve in a number of capacities, and I'm sure you're very familiar with bylaws and just following the working rules of an organization. That membership agreement that I mentioned that sets forth how members will be chosen and vacancies filled. And then the meat and potatoes of the whole thing is an interlocal cooperation agreement. An interlocal cooperation agreement is required by statute whenever multiple counties are coming together to put funds into a joint project. So it's governed by KRS 65, and we follow the rules when forming that interlocal cooperation agreement. That's what I'll be talking about most today. Others may speak to this as well. So we'll get into the weeds of it because it's really the working document that serves to govern this authority. So first of all, we wanted to make sure that the authority, because they're going to be receiving funds from the local governments, they're going to be managing funds that have been appropriated by local governments, we want to make sure that you all receive the information you need to receive on the budget of this authority and how things are going from a financial standpoint in a way that makes sense to your regular budget cycle. So the local governments involved had made sure that this authority has to provide an annual budget by February 1st of each year that accounts for if there's been any debt service, what is owed by the authority, for what purposes, what they're going to need more money for, anything you'd expect to see in a budget, and any sort of audits that have been performed by February 1st of each year, so that you all have time to take into account any budgetary needs on your part as a local government, and again, just how things are going. Now, of course, a lot of the way a business park is going to be successful long-term is to receive tax revenue so that it can continue to maintain its operations, build up, and do what it needs to do. So taxes and fees are being pledged to the authority that are received from the site itself for paying for any services to build the park and then to maintain it.
It's a 7-1.
I'm sorry?
7-1 fiscal year also, just.
That's right, yes. Yes, it does have 7-1 fiscal year. All right, so we've really created an intricate process to make sure that if in the future the business park needs more funds than the original funds that are being put in both through the KPDI program and through the county matches for those KPDI funds, that there's a really clear process by which those additional funds will be requested by the authority and then approved by the local governments. So this is pretty wordy. We've kind of copied and pasted, but I'm going to try to clarify this as simply as I can. Essentially what happens is when the authority is developing its budget, if it says, okay, we've got X amount of dollars and we need more, then the authority is going to request additional appropriations of the local governments. And the local governments have a period of time to review those requests for additional funds to say, yes, we can put that in, or no, we can't. And based on that, the board of the authority is going to say, okay, X county can put in this many dollars, their neighbor county cannot, so we're going to adjust the share percentages in the project based on X county now putting in this many more dollars, right? And at that point, the board is going to put out a proposed revised share percentage schedule, just saying, okay, based on what we've heard from you and what you can put in or what you can't put in, here's where we think the share percentages of the parties belong now, essentially just what's your stake in the project. At that point, the local governments have a chance to look at that and say, yeah, that looks good to me. I couldn't put any more dollars in, and I see that that's been revised, or yeah, I've put that many more dollars in, and my uptake in share percentage looks good to me. Or the parties can say, actually, I don't want my share to go down, so I am going to put more money in. You can have a discussion at that point. So there's a process by which there's a period of time for local governments to take another look at the proposed share percentages as a result of those appropriation decisions and either approve it or ask for a meeting of the local governments to come back to the table and discuss, okay, who wants to put in more? We don't like the changes in share percentages. And we did that specifically so that the authority can make sure it's managing funds correctly and getting the money it needs to continue forward, but also maintain that local control. So that if a local government says, I don't like what the board has adjusted there, or I don't think that's exactly on point with what we said, it always comes back to the local governments. So we've just set forth a process to do that. All right. Now, we have a section dealing with the fact that when the authority has excess funds, say they have budgeted out exactly the amount they're going to need to actually build and maintain the park, they've kept a little reserve, they can keep up to 25% in reserves just for future needs, and then they say, well, we've got more money. We hope this happens, by the way. We hope there are lots of excess funds. That they have a process by which they distribute those excess funds, and that's where each local government share percentage really comes into play. Because, I think, okay, that's good. Because based on each party's share percentage, they're going to get that percentage of excess funds in revenue directly to the local government. So this comes into play on after the park has actually been paid for and maintained and marketed as it needs to be. And we want to make that clear because, again, the whole purpose of the KPDI funds, the parties coming together, is to have a working, successful park. But after that, there may be a cherry on top for the local governments. And those excess funds would be distributed exactly per the share percentages that each party reflects each party's share in the project. Okay, so here we have the proposed revenue sharing to start, and this is based on what each county was able to apply for in KPDI funds and match in KPDI funds. So each party was able to do a little more. I'm going to point out that right off the top, Georgetown and Scott County are going to get 10% off the top of any of those excess funds for providing host county services, police, fire.
10% each or 10%?
10% jointly. Good question. Yeah.
Which?
Jointly together, so 5% each. So 10% for the host community off the top of those excess funds, and then the rest will be distributed per share percentage. So you can see these there, Scott County 16.67%, Madison County 16.67%, Lexington, Fayette, Urban County government 33%, it's merged government, City of Georgetown 16.67%, City of Berea 8.33%, City of Richmond 8.33%. That's purely based on those initial contributions. And like I said, if any party in the future is requested to do more, and they can do more, there's a process to account for that. All right. So this is the fun part, is actually building the business park. Each of the parties has the ability through the authority to work with their members to go apply for available grant funds. So that could be additional funds through the Cabinet for Economic Development, could be congressional funding, you know, any source of funds that's eligible for a business park like this. And there's also a process, I know you all have talked about the fact that this will be an ongoing authority. So because it's between 3 counties and multiple local governments, we hope that this is very successful here in Georgetown, Scott County, and this authority goes on to build sites in neighboring counties as well that are part of the authority. So we've gone ahead and said, if the authority ever wants to look at another site, they have to provide the local governments all the same information they're providing you now, right, about the site. A written description and analysis of the future business parks. The board would bring that to the local governments and to look at. And it would contain a lot of initial information about why they are interested in that site. And then each party's governing body, so you all, would adopt a resolution or whatever is required by local rules to approve that future park. Again, this is all very locally controlled. So once this authority is set up, they're going to be flexible, but they're going to have to continue to work within the constraints of what is good for the communities and what the communities actually approve. So there's going to be continued discussion. I want to make that point because there is a process here. It's not going to be a runaway authority that once it's up and going just makes all its own decisions. All right, so as we said, an authority technically under the law can incur debt in order to finance the park. So there is a section in the interlocal cooperation agreement reflecting its ability to do that. And the law is good to us. It sets forth exactly what happens in the event that debt is incurred and how they may resecure or secure repayment for that indebtedness. And the parties agree to consider any request of the board to enter a lease or a sublease of the business park in order to pay that debt. Also, any party may agree to incur debt on its own in order to help the business park thrive, and that requires notice to the other parties that that party is intending to do that. So again, a lot of notification of all the partners in this process. All right, we've got some miscellaneous terms here. All of the party share percentages will be reflected in capital accounts that'll be maintained for the local government partners. There may be an instance where occupational tax revenue is used as an incentive to attract companies or industries, and those have to be approved by the parties. This authority has to use a competitive bidding process for its purchases and contracts, just like any other governmental entity. And once the park is built up and you have a lot of really happy occupants and businesses located there, We anticipate that they'll form their own association, kind of like an HOA, but a business HOA to continue maintaining the park so that the local governments don't have to continue to undergo a lot of work once it's full. All right, so now comes my work. Once we've got all of these documents complete and everybody's signed off and happy with them, then we will work with the Department for Local Government to follow those SPGE rules. So going back to that special purpose governmental entity body of law, we're required to submit all of the formative documents and the interlocal agreement and an initial budget and an ongoing annual budget to the Department for Local Government. The great part about this and the SPGE process is this is really intended for public transparency. So I don't know if everybody in the room knows this, but you can go look up everyone's interlocal agreements. And it's quite informative for everybody to do that, but it is very helpful to be able to go forward on an annual basis and look and see that that information has been refreshed for the authority so everybody can keep tabs on what it's doing. So we have to fill that out once all those agreements are signed and send that to Department for Local Government, and they approve the whole process. So all of this happens within 15 days. Once we sign those agreements, we're on the clock to submit because Department for Local Government doesn't want any secrecy out here. We've got to make it transparent within a couple of weeks. So this is all of what we have to submit on the Department for Local Government portal and what you can anticipate being able to see as the public. And then this is just my and Neil's contact information for those of us, or those of you who have questions for us that we can't answer here.
I do have a question.
Absolutely.
This has never been brought up, but I would just like to know, the board appointed members, are they paid a salary?
No, ma'am, they are volunteers.
Okay.
And because it's a nonprofit, you know, there's all kinds of language that they won't receive any private remuneration for this.
So I have a question.
Sure.
If the entity, I understand their own body, if they borrow money, they in no way connect with their city or county that debt, correct?
Yeah, it does affect bonding capacity though for a city or county. So I want to make that distinction that, you know, a city or county has its own bonding capacity and it could affect that. So I don't want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
But typically, that being a new entity, is that how they would raise money? How do they normally do that?
No, so a lot, and Michael can talk here from Compass as well. This is our financial partner working on the deal, but a lot of the money that's coming in for this project is through the state KPDI funds, the infrastructure matches that are being provided on the local government level, and then there's also, we've also sought congressional funding for.
Right, but I was thinking like a bigger, like we get all that in place and some big business says, oh, we'd love to be there, but the park needs $10 million more to make it work for them.
Sure.
So then they have to, how's that?
Yeah, I'll be glad to speak on that. And so if there is a need for debt, essentially broadly, there's really two options that you all would have. Either the industrial authority itself could issue the debt, and that debt could be backstopped by the revenues being collected within the authority. Or it could be the authority issues debt and all of the parties of the debt agree to backstop it or appropriate money as an additional security pledge. And so you could have the authority issue the debt either on its own or with the assistance from the parties. Or separately, any one of the parties could issue debt for the authority or for the project itself with additional like lease agreements between the other parties. And so let's say that collectively all of the bodies were okay supporting or appropriating money for debt. It may make economic sense for an entity, let's just, for purposes of this example, say Scott County. It may make sense for Scott County to issue the debt because their cost of capital would be lower than the industrial authority. So in that situation, you guys could issue the debt and then enter into lease agreements with each one of these parties so that you're only responsible for your percentage of the debt. And so there's a lot of different options you all have on the debt side, and it really is just going to come down to how much each entity wants to pledge and then what cost of capital is available at that time.
Any other questions? I just passed out an executive summary that Michael has put together about the business side of it. So
yeah, this may be a good time.
For Tyler. So Michael, we'll transition over, and Michael's with Compass municipal advisors, and I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Judge. As the judge mentioned, I'm Michael George with Compass Municipal Advisors. We're a municipal advisory firm that works with folks across the southeast, cities, counties, school districts, special taxing districts on funding capital projects and economic development projects. And so we've been working with the collective group to run different financial models based on different assumptions within the business park, and analyzing different job scenarios, what revenue options are available, et cetera. And so that's been one of our primary jobs with respect to this project. We've also provided some input and on kind of just various business points within the interlocal. And so what we passed out earlier is just a one-page summary of just kind of some of the primary points of the interlocal agreement from a financial or business point side. And Ann Tyler did a good job of going through a lot of those points, but I want to touch on a few of these to see if you all specifically had any questions on these. And so broadly speaking, you know, the primary purpose of the agreement itself was, as Ann Tyler alluded to, to establish the group, the industrial authority, and what it's going to do, and B, to actually go through and kind of iron out some broad business points, so there's actually some teeth to the agreement itself. And so in terms of some of these business points, like I said, Ann Tyler went through a lot of these, but one of the things that we wanted to do collectively as a group is to, you know, look at this from the perspective of both this potential business park in Scott County, Georgetown, and future endeavors by the group. And so we know that what this group may want for this potential project may differ from what future projects in Scott County, Georgetown, or some of these other areas, Lexington or in Madison County, but they may differ. And so what we wanted to do is within the document, talk about the business park in Scott County, Georgetown, and also provide a mechanism for analyzing other projects outside of Scott County, Georgetown, again with an emphasis on local control. And so when we talk specifically about this potential business park, the discussion and what is listed in the interlocal agreement is the idea that you all would capture or utilize the following revenue sources. And so within the interlocal, you'll notice that the business park, the assumption is that you all have the ability to utilize Scott County, Georgetown property taxes, insurance premium taxes, occupational taxes, net profits tax, as well as any sort of payment associated with a pilot agreement or payment in lieu structure. And so with respect to this business park, those were the revenues that we have assumed. And you'll notice, go ahead, Judge.
Just to emphasize, only on the site of the development.
Exactly. And so revenues collected, and even to go a step further, Judge, revenues collected on the site for the benefit of Scott County School District will benefit Scott County School District. And so there are a lot of taxing districts within the county that would be getting an indirect benefit from this economic development that would not flow through the industrial authority at all. It would just be taxes that they collect. Obviously the school district being the biggest piece of that. But those are the tax revenues that are built into the interlocal agreement. And you'll notice in there, there's language for future business parks that include those revenue sources that also include utility taxes. And so the idea is that those taxes would not be utilized in connection with this project, but again, would be available for future projects. And that is built into the interlocal agreement. One more thing I want to touch on as it relates to the revenue side is just, and Tyler did a good job of talking about this, is just the distribution or the distribution of excess funds. And so kind of mechanically speaking, this park gets up and running, you know, you start collecting property taxes, insurance premium tax, all these different revenues come into the industrial authority. You know, once the industrial authority makes their necessary expenses, so the upkeep of the business park, any debt service, after those expenses are made, all of those revenues would be distributed to the party based upon their ownership percentage. And so the idea is that the money comes into the RETA, it covers the basic operating expenses of the RETA, and then the excess revenues get distributed to the parties. And so that's the main mechanism for the distribution of revenues. And then separately, there's language in the interlocal agreement that allows the authority to set aside reserve money, so up to 25% of their operating budget, to set that aside within the RETA each year. Basically, the idea is that if there's going to be further expansion of the business park, and there may be a thought or consideration that there would need to be additional capital put into that endeavor, that 25% surplus fund would be there to cover it, to try to mitigate any need for future appropriation from any of the bodies involved in the agreement. And so those are some of the business points that were hashed out. And then just a couple other things I want to touch on. There is, and Ann Tallard mentioned this, there's a pretty specific framework for approving future projects. And so, again, the emphasis was on local control. And so if there's another project or opportunity that pops up within Scott County, Georgetown, or any other of these jurisdictions, those projects would have to be approved by all of the various parties involved. And so the RETA itself can't go and create or build out a business park, let's say in Madison County, without your all's approval. And so the idea was that you all have local control over the current project and then any other future projects that would come in. And I think in terms of just broad business points, I think that's it from our side. Ann Tyler did a good job of walking you all through it, but wanted to see if you all had any specifics on the kind of financial side, the revenue side, or anything within the interlocal agreement.
Michael, and this might, Ms. Morgan, you might have to jump in as well. So my question is based on what's called permittable businesses that are allowed in the park. Okay, so there's a guideline set up by the authority. That is not subject to the local legislative body's approval. That's only done by the authority, correct?
Well, pursuant to zoning laws, of course, so
Right.
we'll set that aside. So really, this will be a group that works pretty closely with the local bodies who've appointed them. So yes, the authority will have a lot of decision-making powers for those sorts of things, but we anticipate.
Yeah, can you get the microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Live stream sketching.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
As well for the.
Yeah, so there's a legal answer and a practical answer. The legal answer is that, of course, all of that's pursuant to the zoning of the area, so you have business park zoning in the area. But also, yes, the authority will have some ability to dictate what it's looking for and how it markets the park. That is the purpose of it. But we really, from a practical standpoint, anticipate that this board will work very closely with the local authorities who have appointed them. And they're being handpicked by the local government. So we anticipate that, especially as this park is being developed and conceptualized, that'll be a pretty close relationship. So yes, plus local input.
Well, additional revenue has to be approved by the legislative bodies, but then the authority, they are the ones that dictate what businesses can work within the business park, and so I wanted to make sure I was clear on that, but as long as they were working together, that.
Yeah, and let me give you a comparison. So just like Jack works closely with the local bodies for Scott County projects, that's very much what this authority will do, just on a regional basis. So, it is going to be very much like an economic development authority that you all are used to. It'll just be working with multiple local governments.
What if there is a 3-3 tie?
Then it doesn't happen. We discussed that at length, and it was decided that that means it probably shouldn't happen.
Question on the school taxes. So, with other communities putting tax dollars into this regional park, would they have no part of the school tax at all, right?
Correct.
So there's no legal thing that they can come back and say, hey, we put these tax dollars in, we should get some school tax also? or there are folks coming in to this county to work?
No, so the only taxes that will be collected, property taxes will be collected are within the boundaries of Scott County. And so that means that the Scott County School District will be the only school district receiving tax revenue, at least on the current business park. And one more point I want to bring up, and I failed to mention this earlier. Ann Tyler talked about the revenue split to you all as host community. One thing that this group was very adamant about, especially the mayor and Judge Covington, was adding language into the interlocal agreement that allowed for a review period. And so there's language in there that allows the host communities to go back to the board and potentially ask for more money. And so while you all would be getting extra money as a host community for some of those indirect police and fire, some of those expenses, if 2 or 3 years from now, Judge Covington and Mayor Jenkins come back and say, well, it's really a little bit more than that, then there's a mechanism within the document that would allow that to be recaptured with approval from the body itself.
So you're speaking of the 10%.
Yes, sir.
So that is adjustable
Yes.
according to.
Yes, sir.
So what determined that initial 10%? Why can't it be 15% or better?
That was the number that was discussed. You'll notice in the document itself, and I'll defer to the judge and mayor, because I know this has been a discussion, what that percentage was for a time. There's also language in here that the local bodies present those expenses to the board every year. So in addition to that review process, they're going to go through, or you all are going to go through this process of showing what those expenses are. And so the idea is not only is there a 5-year mandatory period, is that if you get to this in year 2 and say it needs to be a lot higher than 10%, you've got a mechanism to bring that up to the board.
Okay, thank you.
I want to point out the big picture as well, that section 3.06, when we're talking about business, and I really want to emphasize this. We specifically put in the interlocal authorities anticipate that the primary source of funding for the business park described shall be federal and state funding. And Mike was talking about, possibly impact the bond, but we are going to collaboratively and aggressively pursue federal and state dollars to help offset the costs. And if we can successfully apply and realize these federal and state monies, those are funds that will go to help build out and provide the infrastructure for the park. Those are monies that we don't have to take out of our general fund or bond to put towards getting to a point where we can market this to put jobs in the region. And the big picture that you can't put on paper is kind of like what Secretary Noel opened us with, is the power of a job for a family and the power of a job for people to make a better life. And I truly believe that regionally and collaboratively is the best path for us to be able to realize state and federal monies additionally come towards us, but then also to work collaboratively to bring additional jobs to our region. So it's just, and Secretary Knowles touched on that, about the power of how a job can transform a family and make a big difference. And I truly think that is so important, and that's part of the indirect benefit for our community. He said himself, $26.54 was an average hourly rate. That was what he shared. And I think we use $70,000 a year. If the number is correct, that we could possibly put approximately 1,400 jobs at this site, that's almost $100 million annually that goes into our region, that impacts families in our region. And it just makes a big difference. And I wanted to point out that we've agreed that our primary source of trying to get this up and running is pursuing and doing it together, federal and state monies. So, comments or questions on that?
We're looking at this a way to pay for future services, which is what we're all trying to do. The cost of services is going up. You know, paving roads, supplying police and fire protection, and doing all the things that local citizens expect out of us. And that's what our job is. And I've been a big component from day one, as we talked about this, as doing it. For me, this is the right step to go. This is the first step in what we need to do to be competitive. And as I mentioned last year when I took office, I'm a competitive person. I want the best for our people. You don't have to be perfect, because all they expect out of me is provide services. And those services cost. And I'm not looking straight at my face right now. I'm looking that down the road, the next mayor, the next judge, the next fiscal court or city council member will have a mechanism of revenue in place that will be able to benefit to provide those services without any interruption. You gotta have that, and you gotta have a long-range plan to do that. When we look at our face, and that's as far as we get, then we miss things. But if we look down the road, name was Bixby Park was about 20 years ago. And now, yeah, there's still a little bit of work to do with that, but we're getting there. But there was a plan set in place years ago. And we need to continue to pursue that to provide the services that is needed for this county or this region.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing that I didn't say from a legal perspective. You'll see these are watermarked draft, and that's because they are still a work in progress. So just know these are not final documents, but they have been the product of a lot of work. So they're still in draft form, and we're still taking comments.
Any other comments, David?
I do, not just a question, but kind of a statement on for us and for those that are concerned about the process of this. You know, a lot of what may help, and I don't know where this is, and you and I haven't discussed this, where it is in the process is a surprise. But a lot of times, the conceptual idea of what is going to occur, not just in a document, not just talking about what we'd like to have out there, what we'd like to see, but we have talked about walking trails, green space, talking about things like that, where it's not only just a business park, but it's a place where people can also go on the weekends to where we have set aside space. And I think we need to talk about that as well, because that is leading to a quality of life that is working hand in hand with our corporate partners in the area. And I don't know if that is something that, you know, the folks that have spoken, maybe not out against it, but have spoken about it, would like to know, and at what point do we get to having those type of discussions?
Well, first of all, there is a section in here, and we've talked about defining the business park in this interlocal agreement. And even in our application, the application defined that the business park activities would take place on the acreage outside of the bypass. There's approximately 100 acres, give or take a few inside the bypass. I've publicly said in our meetings that I would value the opportunity for the city and the county to look at how could we possibly gain control of that, some of that acreage inside that's near the Elkhorn Creek to make a park. And we'd have to navigate through with our partners, and we'd have to determine what's a fair market value for that property. But we have said that the funds from the development inside the bypass would be used to go to benefit the development outside. And that was in our application. It's been that way the whole way. So along those lines, I think it's a good time and a good opportunity to have dialogue about that. And then, you know, when you talk about what could this look like, well, the future land use map that we have calls for that area to potentially be BP1. If this goes through and the interlocal's approved and it goes to DLG approves it, we have to go to CAFA to get funded. But part of this whole process includes requesting a zone change for that parcel. And when you get into that parcel, that BP1, there's clear language about, how to, the green space requirements, the walking paths, those things. So it would be a good time to talk about that here in the next few weeks. Absolutely.
The reason I ask the question is I don't know if anybody's ever been to Papa John's in Louisville. That area is phenomenal. And there's, we've taken the family down there to do pictures a lot, just taking the kids to go play down there. So when I think of an area of what we're trying to develop, it's something along those lines, which I know that's office space and everything, but a lot of the manufacturing that we might be talking about, the business park, is not going to be heavy manufacturing. It's going to be a similar type location, and your traffic is going to be less because it's going to be in the morning, out in the afternoon. Say it, Todd.
Oh, let's see, Toyota, 2 high schools, 3 elementary schools, and it's gonna be less?
Less traffic within the business
No,
park.
it's not.
Understand the statement, please.
Because you still only have a 2-lane highway, and it's going into a roundabout.
But I think that, looking at that road they were talking about, I think the future was that, I believe they got enough space in that, I think future-wise, looking at that, they knew the growth would be coming that way. I think it's in the future, when if this was to come to fruition, I would probably think that road would be widened to a 4-lane to accommodate that.
Mayor, my understanding is that last leg of the bypass was built with easements, extra wide right of way, and exactly what you're saying. If this starts to get built out, then we go to our state senator, then we go to our state house rep, and we collaboratively and work together to try to get funds to widen that section of the bypass. And that's the path to address that concern. And I hope we have that problem. But I can tell you this, that property is going to be developed. And if it's 1,500 houses, 2.9 trips per day per vehicle, that traffic is going to be a big impact, and more of an impact, in my opinion, than shift work at a BP1 zone business park. And that's my opinion. And we all love Georgetown, Scott County, and I understand the concerns, but we tried to be. I've looked everywhere, and I've talked to many people and talked with owners of different sites and interchanges. And to this point, this is the best opportunity for our community to move forward on having property that we can compete for jobs. And my whole goal is to help our community compete for jobs. And I'll never apologize to that. We've got 5,000 young people in the next 6 years that's going to graduate. We're a growing community. We have to have additional jobs. And jobs change families and change outlooks for families. And that's all I'm trying to do. And that's my only agenda. Because those jobs will help, and then revenue from those jobs will help provide services that we have to, just like the mayor shared. What other questions are there about what Michael presented? I saw a hand go up down here.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Mr. Showalter.
Several questions in no particular order. If this moves forward, an interlocal agreement,
Just here, sir.
if this moves forward and an interlocal agreement is signed, and somewhere down the road, whether it's 2 years down the road or 10 years down the road, one of these 6, either city and or county governments decides that they want to get out of this interlocal agreement. Do we know what that process is? And then, if I can, what a follow-up to that? If that can be done, and if one of those entities, let's just say, I'm just going to use a number, put in $2 million, if it can be done, what's the process of withdrawing from the interlocal agreement? And then is that entity able to recapture the money that the initial investment that they put into the project?
Very good questions. So the first question, whether a party can withdraw, is yes. And Kentucky law sets forth the process for withdrawal, and that law is reflected in the agreement. And I may need Neil to find the exact section and we can quote it, but yes, that process is set forth in law, what happens when a party withdraws. And we've set forth options in the agreement for if a party announces that they want to withdraw, the parties can come together and decide to continue on and just amend the interlocal, or they can terminate the authority, but there's a specific process built into both Kentucky statute and the agreement itself. The second question is that once the money has been committed, it's anticipated that the authority is going to use that funding to purchase land and go ahead and do due diligence. So those initial contributions won't be recaptured. That is actually governed by the interlocal as well, and to a certain extent by Kentucky law.
Section 6.09.
Thank you. I jumped up to talk without my draft.
One additional follow-up to that.
Yes, sir.
In listening to what you just stated, if one of the entities withdraws, does that then change the funding mechanism that's set up?
Yes, sir, it could. The appropriations govern the share percentages held by the party. So if the authority then needs more money, then of course the party that's withdrawing will no longer be a participant in appropriating to the authority and contributing to it, so its share percentages would diminish as a result of that.
And Tom,
Yeah.
so if someone was to drop out,
Right.
if I decided, okay, they're gonna drop out, could I take their share and actually add more money to kind of pick up on that? So, if Scott drops out and I wanna, okay, I'm not gonna get 30%. And I'll pay the difference to get that. Is that correct?
Then the board would go ahead and propose a new set of share percentages, and that would go to the local governments, and everybody would have a chance to review and approve that or call a meeting.
Did I read, as a piggyback onto that, did I read in the draft that, let's say this happened more on the front end of this agreement, how does the money then get paid back to the grant?
So if the authority falls apart, let's say,
Right.
worst case scenario,
Right.
and how the money, so that's actually going to be governed for the KPDI purposes. There is a grant agreement between the Cabinet for Economic Development once they approve the grant funding, and both the grantee, which is the host county, and the beneficiary, which will be this regional authority. So it's, the grantee is kind of a pass-through to the regional authority, and that grant agreement governs what happens in the event that the cabinet has to claw back those funds. So that's not in the interlocal agreement itself, it's actually in that grant agreement, and the cabinet governs that process.
But there would be a payback.
Potentially. We don't have that grant agreement yet tonight.
So I do have a question. So one of the things that you mentioned was that the initial $2 million, but then they could go back and request more and more. Realistically, what would be the timeline before we start seeing any return whatsoever on this?
I'm going to turn over to Compass, who's made the financial projections. You don't want me answering this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I don't think there's a specific answer because we don't know exactly what the projects are on the park. But as the judge alluded to earlier, you know, it is the intent of the group to go after aggressively as much grant funding as possible. And so our initial models have assumed very little debt would be required for the infrastructure. And it's kind of the worst case scenario. And so to the extent that you all get, you know, even just a small amount of grant money, that would likely negate the need for any sort of debt. And so essentially once a business is on board, the revenue is going to first go to cover the operating expenses of the authority, which should be relatively minimal, just the maintenance, and then everything else would be profit.
Okay. Well, you know, you talked about infrastructure, you know, there's got to be the roads built, there's got to be the water lines, there's got to be the sewer lines, electric lines, all of that. Again, that's got to be paid for, but so, you know, do you think, even with grant money, there's still going to be a huge layout for that? Is that realistically 5 years down the road, 10 years, 20 years?
Well, I'll start by saying this. The KPDI money and the local contribution effort far exceed the expected property purchase. And so from day one when this thing's formed, there's going to be, regardless of any future grant opportunities from the state, there should be money in the RETA account to cover some of those infrastructure expenses. And so that will be there hopefully day one, KPDI and grant funds to cover additional money. And so if there was a need for some sort of debt, and which would really be the only reason why it wouldn't be immediately profitable. That means one, that, and I don't say this lightly, I mean, debt is not always a bad thing because it means that you have businesses that want to locate there. And it means that you're going to have future revenue. So debt would signify an investment, a capital investment into businesses coming into the park. And so there are ways on our side to structure the debt so that there's a minimal payment from the RETA until the park is up and running. And so from that perspective, the thought and the hope would be that we would be able to do that in a way where there would be, you know, very little need for additional capital from the parties to put into the RETA itself.
Okay.
I want to kind of tag along on what your question was. You said you're talking about the KIPA money. That's not including any federal dollars as well, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there could be additional federal grant dollars.
Our initial analysis presented has been worst case scenario, which is the bare minimum, the KPDI money and the equity contributions. And so to that point, I think you all would be in good shape. You know, there's also a potential for land sales if there's certain, you know, development there, and you would think that a significant land sale in the park would provide enough revenue to cover substantial infrastructure or operating costs for an extensive period of time.
Your bridge to the next point, possibly, that land sale. But I'll go back, collaboratively and regionally competing for those state and federal grant dollars. It's just my belief, and also from our federal elected officials' offices, the feedback, you're going to get more attention from those federal offices collaboratively and regionally than you would by just going by ourselves. And that's my belief, and that's information that's been shared with me. And that's why I think the regional approach really moves us forward and gets us to where we have jobs on site sooner than later. And I don't have a crystal ball. There's no Project X waiting in the wings. You know, we have to collaboratively recruit and try to sell this opportunity, and I think we'll be able to do that. We have a great opportunity, location with 64 and 75, and then you look down the corridor with Lexington and Madison on that 75 corridor. We have a lot to sell to prospective businesses. And if not this, then tell me what. Because in my opinion, doing nothing is not an option. It is not. And we are selling ourselves short if we do nothing. And that's why I think this approach, this collaborative regional approach is the best. If not, tell me now. If not this, then what?
No, we can't do, people talking about putting houses, a possibility of 1,500 houses built on that particular site, or site. You know, from a city standpoint, you talk about revenue, and I think the others can, when you put houses up, you're not getting much revenue if you talk about property tax. Okay? And you really don't have much control of that. Versus when you have a business park set up, then I'm going to get money from that. I look at it as an investment. That's what I'm looking at, an investment to get revenue.
Any other questions or comments?
One last question from me. The 6 communities here, they've each committed funds for this, correct? Okay. What happens if we go through the process, if we go through all the steps, present the interlocal agreement to each local government, what happens if one of them does not approve it? Does the whole thing fall apart, or do you go back and how does that work?
It's a contract negotiation, so we, take that input and keep working on it. Is the easiest answer to that. But, I will say, from a practical standpoint, of course, we've got the actual regional partners here, so they can speak for themselves. Everybody, just like your local leaders, has put in a lot of time with the local governments involved, really explaining this. None of it's news to anybody. Everybody's been really collaborative in working locally to make sure that there aren't any surprises coming out of this, and that everybody is generally comfortable as we continue to move forward. And that's why it takes a while, but that it should. As Secretary Null said, that's what's important in making these things happen.
I'm listening to all of this, and I'm thinking about Landrum Business Park, and it's 20 years old, and it's been done in 3 phases. So therefore, every phase that we've done, the first one the city did, the second and third, city and county did it together, and we ended up paying cash for the second one, and the third one, we got a little bit of fund from the government. So moving forward on this regional, you're going to be doing that in phases as well. So initially, the funding coming in from all of the entities would actually be able to put in the infrastructure in the first phase, because it's really a marathon, not a sprint. Would that be correct?
I think the logical approach would be what is needed now.
Right.
And addressing that need now. And then phase 2 is yes.
And it is land sales. It's going to be dependent on the topography and all that as to how it's going to be separated out in acreage. And then there's not been a determined amount of money, how much it's going to be sold by acre. Because I think right now, Jack, is at 45,000 an acre now.
25 and 35.
25 and 35.
Most of it's 35, and I would also say phase 3 is paid for. We use KPDI money plus our share, so it's paid for too.
Okay.
So that's 72 acres. That's in phase 75 acres.
The infrastructure and everything.
Mr. Stillwater. This could, I can ask Mr. Conner this question. Any of the 3. At the present time, are there businesses that are located outside, whether it's outside of the state or outside of this county, that are inquiring, wanting to move here?
Yes.
And we're running out of space?
Yes.
Jack, will you answer that?
Yes.
I feel like I'm all talking about that. Yes.
Let me ask this question. Have you turned away from that we didn't have the property that they needed?
Yes. And is that sector non-automotive? Yes. Is it high tech? Yes. Is that enough yeses?
Yes.
Right, so I want to ask a question about the property that's in question. what type of commitments do we have? That, are we looking at just basically one entrance being planned, which is off the bypass? There's not going to be any secondary roads?
There's 2 entrances already cut, and there would be no entrance off Lloyd. That would be insane. So there's 2 entrances cut off the bypass.
Yeah.
They're both off the bypass?
Yeah.
No, there's not going to be any additional roads or any additional
I would not
entrances or
support,
exits?
I would not support any other entrance or anything off of Lloyd. Only the bypass is built, that's why the bypass is built. And there's 2 entrances there. That would be what would support the park.
In addition to that, we have a commitment that if this moves forward, that there's going to be, whether it's trees being planted to provide privacy around the perimeter of this entire property, to get privacy to any adjoining
The
property
BP1
owners.
zoning designation has built-in requirements
Okay.
for buffering, setbacks, and what you're mentioning.
Judge, also, land use plan is approved, also shows above the
We talked about that a lot over the last 2 years, and all those meetings with planning and zoning, that, nothing on Lloyd, where we can do to make it, as pleasing, whatever, around the perimeter. All those things, it's been for the last 2 years in planning and zoning. It's all kind of, I think everybody's on the same page, that's what we all want. I don't think anybody's in disagreement. One of the items, thank you, thanks, Lord. One of the items we've been discussing in the city over the past year and a half is a future fire station. Could there be a commitment that land within that business park, if this moves forward, could be set aside for a future, whether it's a county fire department or a city fire department?
In my mind, the time to talk about that is now. And me mentioning the 100 acres inside the bypass, in my opinion, we have to plan for infrastructure needs. Fire is a future need. If we can carve out an agreement with our partners that's equitable and everybody agrees to, to do that, I think it's wise. So that I think we have to do that. And I feel the same way about, the park piece of it. Inside there's a bottom that I think we ought to try to navigate a mutually agreeable and, proposal that could carve that out and set that aside. Inside the bypass, you have land, a short piece there that goes along the Elkhorn across from Great Crossing Park. It's the hill that goes down there is very steep. It's my belief that I don't think that's developable. It just doesn't make sense. So I think that's an option as well inside, and that strip along the creek, because we're not going to build a business there, in my belief. Some of it's in the floodplain as well, so carve that out. The other piece is there is a historic house there. We will follow all guidelines on preservation, and we'll do everything that's required for that house. That is not an issue. Everybody's aware of that, and we'll carve that out, and we'll follow all guidelines as required for that structure.
One good point to remember that, we look at this part of based on needs. That's part of it, we talk about in our group. What are the needs of that community? If we want to put something in that's going to increase our quality of life, that's something we can talk about, and also get even input from the community. What would you like to see in that particular area? That's something that we as a group can talk about and solve that, because that's important to get some community input as to that. And you also got, when you get to developmental phase. That's where you come in and say, hey, you know, we want to kind of advocate for a walking trail, or make sure you have a bike path, or whatever. Or if you're going to put houses in that, what type of house you're going to put there. Those are all the type of things that you can talk about within this group here, as well as through your planning and zoning, and also through the developmental phase.
Before I want to go back a little bit really quick. If Councilman Stone, if I came across flippant or anything like that, I apologize. I know this is an emotional issue for a lot of people. And I'm trying to set emotion aside on it and think from a practical standpoint. And I tell my kids that all the time. Take the emotion out of it and think about it from a practical standpoint and what it looks like. And then try to make, so I apologize if I came across that way. I don't like hand grenades being thrown at me, and I don't like to throw them back at other people.
The point that I'm trying to make, and I'm different than anyone up here in the fact that I've responded to those calls. I've been to a car wreck with a 19-year-old that died. I've been to a car wreck where high school students have died and been seriously injured, okay? Right out of school. Some of them were later at night. My concern is you're putting extra traffic. Toyota traffic's already there. You've got the 3 elementary schools, one of those being a preschool. You've got 3 high schools technically with Elkhorn crossings. You've got Scott County Middle School, you've got Royal Springs, you've got Phoenix Academy, all in that same area. And you're going to introduce more traffic into it. And it's all going to that roundabout. That can't handle the traffic at Scott County High School now. That's my concern. I look at it from a safety aspect, from a traffic aspect.
I guess, Todd, though, I think what you're looking at it is if it stays undeveloped, though. It's going to develop.
It's going to develop, and it's only going to get worse for you. And be it semi-trucks or be it cars. You know, we have
I think all of us have to assume that at some point the bypass is going to develop.
Right, but what we have to do as stewards of this county is try to think of it in aspects of what is the safety aspect for the citizens of this county.
And that, for me, and obviously I'm involved in schools, that's what I'm thinking of when I think of business park versus whatever number of people use for homes in there. I see less traffic in a business park. You know, I was at the run Sunday morning, running the business park that we have now. It was a great place, a great run, no traffic whatsoever this weekend. So take that and make it 1,000 homes every day is a little bit different. So that's where I'm looking at.
Yeah, I get you, but 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an 80,000-pound semi goes over the hill. Brakes go out and go into that roundabout.
They come through there anyway.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, and we're introducing more. You know, that's my concern. That's my concern, coming from the law enforcement standpoint.
But we hope that once this development starts to grow, then the state will come in and say, okay, we know that this area is going to grow, so therefore, we need to make sure this expands to cover it. So you widen it. And I get it, that it's still not going to stop people from getting accidents. That's still what's going to happen. That's the thing. I get it. But for what we're doing with now, I think we look at trying to do what's safety. And I applaud that, Pastor Ed, I'm the same way. I come from the school business. Anything else is, that's why we put SROs in schools. Because we want to make sure that those kids in our schools are afforded the same protection as people out in the community.
Mayor, we're getting a little outside the scope of our agenda, and we're cutting up on library closure time. So I know, like you said, it's a passionate topic, but we're here on the scope of the interlocal and the authority. So we just want to bring it back.
Thank you, Devin, and we do need to respect that. I think we've done what we wanted to do. We presented the interlocal. We had a great presentation. Very thankful for Secretary Noel and we've had good dialogue. As we move forward and consider the interlocal, there'll be opportunity for public comment, and then we'll go from there. Is there any other comment or question? If not, should we adjourn?
But before we adjourn, I want to make sure that everybody's clear that, you know, this will go back to the elected body Saturday for them to vote. And again, thank you for being here tonight, and we are adjourned.